The Mafia boss's daughter whispered, "Mommy hurts me." While I babysat, he asked, "Did she tell you anything?" And I had 10 seconds to decide. The wrought iron gates had groaned open like a reluctant beast, swallowing the black car and me with it. The sprawling Caruso estate, a fortress of gilded cages and shadowed marble, had become my prison. Every column, every opulent chandelier, every carefully pruned rosebush in the manicured gardens screamed of the debt I now carried, a weight heavier than any chains. My father's hidden life, his gambling, had stolen everything. My art history degree, my quiet dreams, my very freedom, all sacrificed to this merciless arrangement with Dante Caruso. My first few days here blurred into a monotonous parade of silent, subservient tasks. I was not a maid, not truly, more like a shadow, assigned to the quiet, neglected corners of the vast house, instructed to assist the child, Sophia, when needed. The staff treated me with a cautious distance, their eyes flicking over me, assessing, pitying, or perhaps just wary. I understood. I was the new charity case, the one whose life had been bought and sold. My initial introduction to Ariana, Dante's wife, had been brief and chilling. She was a woman carved from ice and diamonds, her beauty sharp, her smile a thin, polite line that never quite reached her eyes. She had regarded me with an air of mild distaste, as if I were a particularly stubborn smudge on her otherwise pristine world. "Do not interfere," she'd said, her voice soft but laced with an undeniable steel, "and we shall have no issues." The message was clear. My purpose here was to exist, not to live. 2 mornings after my arrival, I was instructed to take Sophia for a walk in the gardens. The child, no older than 5, was a wisp of a thing, with wide, somber eyes that held an ancient sadness. She barely spoke, her movements hesitant, as if afraid to take up too much space. We walked beneath the cool shade of ancient oak trees, the only sound the rustle of leaves and my own internal screaming. This wasn't the life I'd envisioned, poring over texts, sketching architectural marvels. This was servitude, rendered in silk and silence. Sophia tugged lightly on my skirt, her small hand warm against the fabric. "Flower," she whispered, pointing to a vibrant scarlet bloom. I crouched, admiring it with her, explaining the velvety texture of its petals. It was a small, fragile moment of normalcy, a brief reprieve from the suffocating grandeur of my new reality. In those quiet minutes, a thread of something unfamiliar began to weave itself between us, a silent understanding. My heart ached for her. I knew what it felt like to be lost in a world that wasn't built for you. Later that week, I was in the cavernous library, dusting ancient leather-bound volumes that probably hadn't been touched in decades. The silence was absolute, broken only by the soft click of my duster against a spine. I didn't see him enter, but I felt him. The air shifted, growing heavy, charged with an undeniable, formidable presence. Dante Caruso. He stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the brighter hallway, his shoulders broad, his posture commanding. He didn't speak, just watched me, his gaze analytical, almost predatory. My breath hitched, caught in my throat. I hated him. Hated him for what he'd done, for reducing my father to a gambler, for turning me into a commodity. He turned his attention to a distant bookshelf, pulling a volume, his movements fluid and precise. He was a man of quiet power, every gesture intentional, controlled. My gaze, despite my resentment, snagged on the sharp line of his jaw, the subtle flex of muscle as he replaced the book. There was an animalistic grace to him that was both terrifying and, to my shame, compelling. But I quickly reminded myself, he was the architect of my misery. There was nothing compelling about that. Days bled into weeks. My routine solidified. Mornings with Sophia, helping her with her lessons, reading stories in a hushed corner of the conservatory. Afternoons often found me tending to odd tasks, sorting through art catalogs or assisting the estate manager with inventory, anything to keep me out of Ariana's direct path. Sophia's comfort with me grew. She would lean against my side while I read, her small hand finding mine. She would even offer small, shy smiles, glimpses of the child she truly was beneath the layers of fear. The household staff, particularly an older woman named Maria, who oversaw the kitchen, had started to treat me with a sliver more warmth. "You're good with the child," she'd murmured to me one afternoon as I helped shell peas. She doesn't smile much. It was a small comment, but it felt like a lifeline in the sea of indifference. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sophia and I were building a towering structure of blocks in the sitting room. The room was bathed in the warm, late-day sunlight that poured through tall, arched windows. Sophia, usually so careful, accidentally sent a precarious tower toppling. The crash was louder than expected. Ariana, who had been engrossed in a magazine on a nearby velvet sofa, flinched violently. Her perfect composure fractured. "Sophia!" Ariana's voice, though still quiet, was sharp, cutting through the gentle afternoon. Her eyes, usually so placid, narrowed, fixing on the child. Sophia froze, her small body tensing, her head ducking. Before Ariana could utter another word, a deeper voice cut through the air. "Is there a problem?" Dante stood in the doorway, a newspaper clutched in one hand. His attention wasn't on Ariana, or even fully on me, but on Sophia. There was a subtle shift in the air, a quick, almost imperceptible tension that ran through the room. Ariana's expression softened instantly, becoming apologetic. "No, Dante, just a minor accident. Sophia was a little clumsy." Her words were saccharine, laced with an artificial sweetness that curdled my stomach. Dante's gaze lingered on Sophia, who was still frozen. He then looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable passing through his eyes before he returned to his paper. "See that she tidies it," he instructed, his tone even, devoid of any discernible emotion. But the implied warning was there, the quiet assertion of his authority. Ariana merely nodded, her composure fully restored. Later, as I helped Sophia painstakingly rebuild her block tower, I felt a peculiar sensation. A confusing warmth, a minuscule spark of something akin to gratitude for Dante's intervention. He hadn't protected me, not directly. He'd simply diffused a situation that was escalating towards his daughter. But seeing the fear drain from Sophia's face, watching her relax a fraction under his presence, it gave me pause. Was he capable of protecting anything but his empire? I quickly shoved the thought away. He was still the monster who owned me. That brief, almost imperceptible act couldn't erase the crushing burden he had imposed. But the seed was planted, a tiny, annoying speck in my otherwise clear hatred. The next few days, Ariana seemed to observe Sophia with a chilling intensity. Her smiles became forced, her touch, when she offered it, stiff and cold. I started noticing small things. Sophia's reluctance to be alone with her mother. The way her shoulders hunched when Ariana called her name. My observational skills, honed by years of studying subtle cues in art, now focused on the fragile child. One evening, after helping Sophia prepare for bed, I was tidying her room. The child sat on the edge of her bed, tracing patterns on the silk duvet. The room was softly lit by a whimsical nightlight, casting gentle shadows across the walls. I folded a tiny sweater, my thoughts drifting to my own life, now so irrevocably altered. "Elara?" Sophia's voice was barely a whisper, so soft I almost missed it. I turned, my gaze falling on her small form. Her eyes, usually downcast, were lifted to mine, filled with a raw, innocent plea that tightened a knot in my chest. "Yes, sweet pea?" I kept my voice soft, inviting. She slid off the bed, her bare feet silent on the thick carpet. Slowly, deliberately, she approached me. My breath caught, an instinctive alarm sounding deep within me. This wasn't her usual shyness. This was something deeper, more urgent. She reached for my hand, her fingers cold against my skin. Then, she pulled at the sleeve of her nightgown, revealing her small, delicate upper arm. My gaze dropped, and the air left my lungs in a silent whoosh. A blooming bruise, an ugly purple-green, marred the pale skin just above her elbow. It was unmistakable. My vision tunneled. The soft light in the room suddenly too bright, too dim. Everything and nothing all at once. My entire body went rigid. "Mommy hurts me," she whispered again, her voice cracking, her eyes welling up with tears that finally spilled over, trailing hot paths down her cheeks. Her tiny chin trembled. The world stopped. The gilded cage, the debt, Dante Caruso, my hatred. All of it vanished, replaced by a single searing image, that bruise. My unyielding sense of morality and justice, which had been crushed beneath the weight of my servitude, roared back to life. This was not a debt. This was a child, an innocent. My heart didn't just hammer. It seized, lodged somewhere in my throat, choking me. My stomach clenched, a cold, hard knot of pure, unadulterated horror. I wanted to scoop her into my arms, to promise her sanctuary, to scream for justice. But then the terrifying reality of my situation crashed over me, a tidal wave of cold dread. Ariana, her family, the power they wielded, the unspoken rules of this brutal, amoral world. Exposing her, contradicting her, would be a death sentence, not just for me, but potentially for Sophia too. A silent, frantic clock started ticking in my head. 10 seconds. Maybe less. What would happen if I told Dante? He was her father, yes. But he was also a man who lived by ruthlessness, by calculated moves. Would he protect his daughter? Or protect the delicate political balance of his marriage and his empire? Would he simply dismiss me as a meddling, indentured servant and then dispose of me? The thought sent a fresh wave of icy fear through me, chilling me to the bone. My desire for freedom warred with my fierce protective instinct. I longed for a life where I could protect the innocent without fear of reprisal. But I was in a place where doing so could destroy everything. The faint rumble of an engine reached me then, a low growl from somewhere far below, signaling a car arriving. Dante. He was home. I barely registered the sound, my mind still locked in a desperate, impossible struggle. My gaze darted from Sophia's tear-streaked face to the bruise, back to the silent, pleading eyes. She was so small, so utterly vulnerable. My core wound, the profound sense of powerlessness, screamed at me. I was trapped. Footsteps echoed from the grand hallway, growing steadily closer. Heavy, deliberate steps. I knew them. They were Dante's. I swiftly pulled Sophia's sleeve back, down, covering the bruise, my movements automatic, driven by an instinct for self-preservation that tasted like ash in my mouth. My mind raced, weighing the consequences. If I spoke, if I implicated Ariana, it wouldn't be a quiet conversation. It would be a declaration of war against a powerful family, and I, a nameless, indebted woman, would be the first casualty. But if I stayed silent, the door to Sophia's room swung open without a knock. Dante Caruso filled the frame, a dark, imposing figure against the softly lit hallway. He had shed his jacket, his dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled to expose strong forearms. His presence was overwhelming, instantly sucking the air out of the room. He looked tired, lines etched around his eyes, but his gaze was as sharp and discerning as ever. It swept over Sophia, then landed on me, lingering for a beat too long. His eyes, dark as midnight and just as unreadable, narrowed imperceptibly. He took a single step into the room, his weight shifting. Sophia, seeing him, whimpered, instinctively shrinking back against my leg. My fingers curled protectively around her small shoulder. He didn't need to ask if something was wrong. His perception was uncanny. He saw the tears on Sophia's face, the tremor in my hand, the tension coiling in my stance. He saw the shared secret, palpable in the hushed air of the room. He simply stood there, waiting, observing. My throat felt dry, a tight, burning expanse. Every fiber of my being screamed to expose the truth, to protect this child. But the sheer terror of Ariana's power, of Dante's world, silenced me. I could not, would not, put Sophia in further danger, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that speaking the truth now would do exactly that. It would only make things worse. My breath hitched as I met his gaze, my decision solidifying in a cold, hard block within my chest. I had to lie. For Sophia. For myself. Dante's voice, when he finally spoke, was low, a rumbling query that vibrated through the quiet room. What did she say? It wasn't a question, not really. It was a command, a challenge. He already knew something had happened. He was testing me. My gaze didn't waver, but inside, a silent, desperate prayer formed, begging for forgiveness, begging for strength. No, I began, my voice a shaky whisper. No, she didn't say anything. The lie tasted bitter, like poisoned wine. Dante's dark eyes bore into mine, searching, peeling back layers, dissecting my every tremor. For a long, agonizing moment, he simply stared, his expression unreadable. I could feel the heat of his gaze, the weight of his suspicion, pressing down on me, crushing the air from my lungs. I didn't breathe. I just held his stare, praying he would believe me. Then, his mouth, a grim, firm line, relaxed fractionally. He merely inclined his head. Good, he stated, his voice devoid of emotion, the single word sealing my fate, binding us together in a dangerous, unspoken secret. He didn't believe me, not entirely. I knew it. He knew I knew it. And just like that, a new, terrifying game had begun. Alara makes her decision to lie to Dante. Her, no, she didn't say anything. A silent, desperate prayer. Dante's eyes bore into hers, searching, and he simply states, good. The implication is that he doesn't fully believe her, and this shared, unspoken secret now binds them in a dangerous new way. The lie had hung in the air, a poisonous, invisible cloud between Dante and me, and even now, the morning after, its bitterness lingered on my tongue. He'd said good. Not good that Sophia hadn't said anything, but good that I hadn't said anything. Good that I'd chosen silence. Good that I'd chosen self-preservation over the immediate, terrifying truth. It was a concession to the brutal reality of this world, a secret burden that now bound us in a way I couldn't articulate and didn't want to acknowledge. My hands still trembled sometimes, recalling Sophia's whispered words, the bruise blooming on her arm. The memory was a festering wound in my mind, but the fear of Ariana's retribution was a cold, constant companion. She was a viper, beautiful and deadly, and her reach, even in this gilded cage, felt limitless. My resolve to protect Sophia solidified then, hardening into a diamond core within me. It wouldn't be with rash accusations, not yet. It would be with cunning, with observation, with every ounce of wit I possessed. I would be Sophia's shield, a silent, watchful guardian. That morning, the estate felt different. The usual hushed efficiency seemed laced with an unspoken tension, an echo of the confrontation that hadn't quite happened. I moved through the house with a heightened sense of awareness. Every shadow a potential threat, every creak of the floorboards a warning. When I saw Sophia, her eyes were still shadowed, but her small hand found mine with a desperate urgency that squeezed my own heart. I gave her a small, reassuring smile, a silent promise. Later that afternoon, Sophia and I were in the sun-drenched conservatory, a vast room bursting with exotic plants and the humid scent of rich earth. She was drawing, her head bent low over a sketch pad, her tongue poking out in concentration. Ariana entered, her presence like a sudden drop in temperature. She didn't look at me, her gaze going straight to Sophia, a cold assessment in her pale eyes. "Sophia, your posture is atrocious," Ariana announced, her voice precise and sharp. "Sit up straight, darling. Your father expects a lady, not a wilting flower." Sophia flinched, her shoulders hunching even more, her pencil clattering to the glass-topped table. I saw the familiar fear ripple through her. My heart squeezed. I had to intervene, subtly. "Perhaps she's simply leaning closer to see the intricate details of her drawing, Signora," I offered, my voice calm, almost conversational. "She has a real artist's eye for the small things, just like the delicate veins on these orchids." I gestured to a nearby plant. drawing Ariana's eye away from Sophia for a crucial moment. Ariana's gaze flickered to me, a flash of annoyance in her expression before she forced a thin smile. "Indeed," she drawled, her tone dismissing me. "But even artists must maintain decorum. Don't encourage sloppiness, Alara." She turned back to Sophia, her focus unwavering. "Now hold your head up. I won't tell you again. The implication was clear. The next correction would not be verbal." I saw the tremor in Sophia's small hand as she grasped her pencil. My mind raced. How could I create a diversion? My gaze landed on a large, vibrant butterfly that had somehow flown into the conservatory, fluttering against a pane of glass. "Look, Sophia!" I exclaimed, my voice filled with genuine wonder. "A monarch! They're so rare this time of year." I rose and moved quickly, silently, to the window, peering out as if fascinated. Sophia's head snapped up, her attention instantly captivated by the bright orange wings. She scrambled off her seat, forgetting her posture, and rushed to the window beside me, her fear momentarily forgotten. "Pretty," she breathed, her small fingers reaching out as if to touch the glass. Ariana, caught off guard by the sudden shift, hesitated, her attention divided. The moment of potential cruelty passed, swallowed by the child's innocent fascination. Ariana sighed, a sound of mild exasperation, before turning and sweeping out of the room, her elegant heels clicking away down the hall. My shoulders sagged with relief. It had worked. A small victory, yes, but a victory nonetheless. Sophia, still entranced, turned to me, a fragile smile gracing her lips. "Did it fly away?" she asked. "Yes, sweet pea," I murmured, my hand gently stroking her hair. "But it'll come back someday, they always do." I hoped the metaphor wasn't lost on her. I hoped she would find her freedom too. In the days that followed, my subtle interventions became a routine. If Ariana's voice sharpened, I'd spill something, need a towel, or distract with a sudden question about Sophia's artwork. If Ariana reached for Sophia too quickly, I'd step between them, offering a toy or a book. It was a tightrope walk, fraught with danger, but each time Sophia's small body relaxed, each time her eyes lost that shadow of fear, it fueled me. My internal conflict between self-preservation and protecting this innocent child intensified. I hated being trapped, but I couldn't leave Sophia. Not now. I also began to notice Dante. He was a silent observer, a phantom presence in the vast house. Sometimes I'd catch his gaze from across a hallway, or feel his eyes on me as I helped Sophia with her lessons. He didn't interfere, didn't comment, but he watched. His dark, intelligent eyes seemed to absorb everything, like black holes of silent judgment. I could never quite decipher the expression there, a constant, unsettling blankness that nevertheless hummed with an almost predatory awareness. He seemed to be calibrating me, assessing my every move, particularly my interactions with Sophia and Ariana. It was unnerving, yet, strangely, it also made me feel seen, in a way no one else here did. The silence that now clung to our unspoken secrets stretched, taut and fragile. I wondered if he understood the delicate dance I performed. Did he see Ariana's true nature, or was it simply a matter of inconvenience for him, something he preferred not to acknowledge? My hatred for him, the architect of my misery, still simmered beneath my skin. But sometimes, when I caught him watching Sophia with that strange, unreadable intensity, I saw a flicker of something in his eyes that confused me. One evening, I was informed that I was required to attend family dinner. My stomach tightened instantly. These dinners were rare, usually reserved for important guests or specific family events. Being forced to witness the Caruso family dynamic firsthand was a prospect that filled me with dread. I was to sit at the far end of the long mahogany table, a decorative, silent fixture, present but not truly belonging. Lorenzo, one of Dante's omnipresent bodyguards, escorted me down the grand staircase, his heavy footsteps echoing on the marble. The scent of roasted meat and expensive wine already wafted from the dining room. The double doors were already open, revealing a glittering tableau. The dining room was immense, its walls adorned with dark tapestries and gilded portraits. A crystal chandelier, heavy with light, cast a brilliant glow over the polished table laden with silver and porcelain. Dante sat at the head, Ariana at the opposite end, regal and cold in a silk gown the color of frozen moonlight. Several other men, all impeccably dressed, sat scattered around the table, their faces grim, their conversations hushed. Associates, I assumed. Lorenzo silently indicated my seat, several chairs down from Ariana. I slid into the ornate chair, trying to make myself as small and inconspicuous as possible. The conversations were primarily in rapid-fire Italian, a language I barely understood, punctuated by the clink of silverware and the occasional deep rumble of Dante's voice. He seemed to command the entire room with a quiet authority that was both chilling and undeniably compelling. His power wasn't just in his words, but in the way every eye tracked him, every pause in conversation waited for his cue. Sophia, looking small and fragile in a pale dress, sat beside Ariana. Her spoon tinkled against her bowl as she slowly ate her soup. I watched her, my internal radar on high alert. Ariana leaned over. A whisper meant only for Sophia, yet her words, though quiet, were sharp enough to make Sophia flinch. I caught a single word. Clumsy. My stomach twisted. A heavy silence descended as Dante addressed the room, speaking in a low, even tone. The men around the table nodded, their expressions serious. I gathered from the few English words I understood that a rival family was making trouble, encroaching on territory. A discussion of power, of alliances, of potential consequences. It was a stark reminder of the ruthless world I was now inextricably linked to. As the main course was served, a rich, aromatic lamb, Ariana looked at Sophia's plate, which still held a significant portion of her meal. "Darling, you're barely touching your food," she chided, her voice carefully modulated for the company, but still carrying that edge. "You know how important it is to be strong. Your father expects it." She glanced pointedly at Dante, who continued his conversation, seemingly oblivious. "She's just a child, Ariana," one of the older associates, a man with a heavy jowl and a surprisingly kind gaze, murmured. "Let her eat at her own pace." Ariana's smile was glacial. "A child who needs to learn discipline, Salvatore. Weakness is not tolerated in this family, not even in its youngest members." Her eyes flickered to Sophia, a silent warning passing between mother and daughter. Sophia's small hand tightened around her fork, her knuckles white. I could feel her fear from across the table. Then the true cruelty revealed itself. Ariana, with deliberate slowness, picked up a single pea from Sophia's plate with her own fork. "If you do not finish your plate, my dear," she said, her voice sugary sweet, "perhaps you don't deserve dessert. And perhaps a few days of quiet solitude would help you appreciate the efforts of our cook." Her eyes held a menacing glint. The threat was clear. Solitary confinement, denied even the simple comfort of a treat. My breath hitched. This wasn't just about food. It was about control, about crushing a child's spirit. My hands clenched under the table. I wanted to scream, to grab Sophia and run, but I was helpless. I had to choose my battles carefully. Dante finally turned his head, his gaze sweeping over the table. He didn't speak to Ariana, his eyes instead finding mine. A brief, unreadable flash of something passing between us before he looked away. "Is there a problem, Alara?" he asked, his voice low, drawing all eyes to me. Caught off guard, I stammered, "No, Signor Caruso, just admiring the chandelier." The lie was clumsy, but the only thing I could think of. He didn't press, merely inclined his head, but the warning was there, the quiet assertion of his awareness. The dinner continued, though I barely tasted my food, my focus solely on Sophia, trying to send her silent encouragement, hoping my presence was a small comfort. Later that evening, after the dinner had finally concluded, and I had helped Maria clear the last of the dishes, I found myself walking past Dante's study. The door was ajar, and I heard voices, sharp and agitated. I paused, my curiosity overcoming my usual caution. A man, one of the associates from dinner, was pacing, his voice raised in anger. "This is unacceptable, Dante," he fumed, his Italian sharp and guttural. "To cut off the Rossi family like this? It's bad for business. It's an insult to tradition." Dante stood by his large, ornate desk, his back to the door, a silhouette of immutable power. He didn't move, didn't flinch. "Tradition, Salvatore, is only useful when it serves its purpose," he said, his voice dangerously calm, barely above a whisper. Yet it cut through the associate's rage like a razor. The Rossi family has grown weak. Their loyalty is questionable. They become a liability. The associate sputtered. But they will retaliate. They will see this as an act of war. Dante finally turned, his face illuminated by the soft desk lamp. His features were stark, expressionless, yet his eyes burned with an icy fire. "Let them," he said, and the words were not a challenge, but a chilling statement of fact. "They will learn what happens when they cross me." The associate visibly wilted under his gaze. There was no argument, no appeal, just Dante's cold, unyielding will. This was the monster, the man who owned me, the man who crushed all opposition without a flicker of emotion. The ruthlessness was absolute, terrifying in its quiet precision. I backed away silently, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My perception of him, which had wavered at the family dinner when he'd briefly met my gaze, solidified once more into fear. He was indeed a monster, a man of ice and steel. Hours later, the house was silent, wrapped in the deep stillness of the night. I couldn't sleep. The image of Sophia's bruised arm, Ariana's cold cruelty, and Dante's chilling ruthlessness all whirled in my mind. I decided to check on Sophia. Quietly, I padded down the hallway, the soft carpet muffling my steps. Her door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open just enough to peer inside. A soft nightlight cast a gentle glow over her bed. She was curled on her side, a small, innocent bundle, her breathing even. And then I saw him. Dante. He was standing by her bed, completely still, his dark silhouette against the moonlight streaming through the window. He wasn't touching her, wasn't making a sound. He was just watching her sleep, my breath caught. The formidable, ruthless man from the study, the one who had so coldly dismissed the lives of his rivals, was here, watching his daughter. There was no anger, no calculation in his posture, only a profound stillness. The moonlight softened the sharp angles of his face, revealing something almost vulnerable in his quiet contemplation. He stood there for a long moment, a sentinel in the darkness, and in his stillness, I saw a flash of something undeniably human, a hint of the father perhaps, a shadow of the man beneath the monster. It was a stark contrast to the ruthlessness I had just witnessed, a dissonance that shattered my black and white perception of him. How could such a man harbor such tenderness? He seemed so utterly alone in that moment, a powerful king humbled by the innocence of his sleeping child. I watched him for a few more seconds, feeling an unfamiliar sense of confusion, before quietly backing away, leaving him to his solitary vigil. The next day, my confusion only deepened. I was drawn to the kitchen, seeking a glass of water in the dead of night, unable to shake the image of Dante by Sophia's bed. As I poured myself a drink, a shadow fell over me. Dante. He stood in the doorway, just as he had in the library that first day, but this time his presence felt different. Less predatory, more watchful. "Can't sleep?" he asked, his voice low, a surprisingly gentle rumble in the quiet room. I startled, nearly dropping the glass. "No, Signor Caruso," I replied, my voice a little shaky. "Just thirsty." He merely nodded, moving further into the kitchen, his gaze sweeping over the polished surfaces. He went to the industrial-sized coffee machine, pouring himself a mug. The air between us was thick with unspoken things, with the secret of Sophia's bruise, with my lie, with his quiet vigilance over his daughter. "You're good with Sophia," he said, stirring cream into his coffee. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact, his voice devoid of emotion, yet the words felt weighty. My pulse quickened. "She's a sweet child. She just needs care." I risked, my words carefully chosen. He lifted his mug, taking a slow sip, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "Care," he repeated almost to himself. "Something she hasn't had enough of." The words were an admission, a crack in his impenetrable facade, and a shiver ran down my spine. Did he see it too? Did he understand? The conversation hung unfinished between us. Then he simply turned and left, leaving me alone in the silent kitchen, the ghost of his words echoing. A few days later, a group of Dante's associates arrived for what was described as a working lunch at the estate. The atmosphere was charged. Men moving with a controlled intensity, their suits sharp, their voices low and serious. I was tasked with overseeing the setting of the smaller, informal dining room, a room used for less formal, yet no less important, discussions. As I arranged floral centerpieces, my back to the door, I felt a presence behind me. Well, what do we have here? A voice drawled, heavy with insinuation, startling me. I turned to find a man I hadn't seen before, younger than Dante, with slicked back hair and a smug, assessing smile. His eyes, a pale, almost colorless blue, raked over me, lingering too long on my figure. He was one of them, one of Dante's dangerous associates. "I'm Alara," I said, my voice carefully neutral, my spine stiffening. "I assist with household duties." He chuckled, a rough, unpleasant sound. "Household duties, huh? You look like you could assist with other things too, Alara. Perhaps something more personal?" Ariana, enraged by Alara's growing bond with Sophia and sensing Dante's altered attention, publicly humiliates Alara, threatening her. Before Alara can react, Dante steps in, his voice dangerously low. "She is under my protection." And the declaration is a shock to everyone, sealing Alara's fate deeper into his world and marking her as his. The words had resonated, cutting through the tense air of the informal dining room like a newly sharpened blade. She is under my protection. Dante's declaration had been a shock, not just to me, but to the slick-haired associate who had been leering at me, and to Ariana, who had gone rigid at the far end of the table. The man, whose name I now vaguely recalled as Marco, had spluttered, a flush rising on his pale cheeks, his smug smile dissolving into a bewildered frown. His eyes, the pale, almost colorless blue, flicked nervously from Dante to me, then back to Dante. He opened his mouth as if to argue, but the look Dante gave him was a silent, absolute command. A warning. Marco snapped his jaw shut, his posture suddenly deferential. Ariana's carefully constructed composure had shattered. Her face, usually a mask of serene indifference, twisted, her eyes flashing with a raw, ugly anger that wasn't meant for public consumption. She didn't speak, but the silent fury emanating from her was a palpable force, directed squarely at me. The air crackled with it, a tangible threat. She didn't need to say a word for me to understand. My blood ran cold. Dante had marked me, yes, but he had also painted a target on my back, a target Ariana would undoubtedly try to hit. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken tension, until Dante, without another glance at Marco or Ariana, had simply said, "The lunch will proceed." His voice was low, even, yet the authority in it was absolute. Marco had cleared his throat, his gaze carefully avoiding mine, and quickly turned back to the table, resuming his seat with an awkward haste. Ariana, after a long, venomous stare in my direction, had collected herself, her expression tightening into a semblance of control once more, though her jaw remained clenched. I stood frozen for a few more seconds, my hands trembling, before I managed to slip out of the room, my heart still racing from the sudden, terrifying shift in my status. The repercussions were immediate. Within the hour, Lorenzo, Dante's primary bodyguard, found me sorting through fabric samples in the linen closet. He was a mountain of a man, usually reserved for guarding Dante himself. Now he stood blocking the narrow doorway, his presence filling the small space. "Signorina," he rumbled, his voice deep. "Signor Caruso has instructed me to remain with you at all times when you are outside your quarters or designated safe spaces within the estate." My mouth went dry. "At all times?" I asked, a tremor in my voice. This wasn't protection. It was surveillance. It was a cage, albeit one with a bigger lock. Lorenzo merely nodded, his expression impassive. "For your safety, and for the security of the estate." The words were clipped, professional, but the implication was clear. I was too important, or too dangerous, to be left unsupervised. My fate was sealed deeper into Dante's world, and with it, my freedom now meant roaming the halls with a silent shadow. And yet, paradoxically, Dante's declaration also opened up new, unexpected pathways within the confines of the estate. While Lorenzo was my constant companion, his presence seemed to deter the petty tyrannies of other staff members and even, to my surprise, provided a strange kind of liberation. My movements, though monitored, were no longer restricted to the few areas I'd been allowed previously. The Signor has also granted you access to the main gardens, the larger library and the conservatory at your discretion, Lorenzo informed me the following morning, his gaze sweeping over the elaborate entrance hall where we now stood. I blinked, surprised. He did? The main gardens stretched for acres, a labyrinth of sculpted hedges and hidden pathways. The larger library was a treasure trove I'd only peeked into. It felt less like a gilded cage and more like a slightly larger, albeit still heavily guarded one. And with Lorenzo by my side, no one dared challenge me. I spent the next few days exploring, a silent behemoth always a few steps behind me. I discovered a hidden rose garden, a riot of velvety petals and soft fragrance, tucked away behind a towering hedge maze. I wandered through the vast formal halls, admiring the ancient tapestries and paintings, my art history background finally finding a meager outlet. I even spent hours in the main library, losing myself in dusty volumes on Renaissance art, Lorenzo standing patiently by the massive oak doors, a silent sentinel. It was a bizarre kind of freedom, one bought at the cost of utter subservience, yet I clung to it. But the relief was fleeting. My heightened senses, now accustomed to the subtle currents of the Caruso household, began to pick up on new, disturbing patterns. Ariana's anger hadn't faded. It had merely gone underground, simmering beneath a veneer of icy politeness. She avoided me, which was a relief in itself. But her interactions with Sophia became colder, more deliberate. The casual cruelties I'd witnessed before now felt like mere preludes. One afternoon, a few days after Dante's public declaration, I was in the secondary library, helping Sophia sort through her picture books. Lorenzo waited just outside the double doors, his presence a comforting hum of security. Sophia looked small and vulnerable, her usually pale face a little flushed. She complained of a tummy ache, a common occurrence lately. "This one," she whispered, pointing to a brightly colored book about fantastical creatures. As she reached for it, her sleeve rode up, and I saw it. Another bruise. This one was a faint yellow, almost faded, on her inner forearm. But beneath it, a fresh purplish mark was just beginning to bloom. My breath caught, a silent gasp of horror. My vision blurred for a split second, the bright colors of the books fading into an ugly monochrome of fear and rage. This was escalating. Ariana wasn't just subtly abusing her. She was becoming more brazen, more dangerous. My stomach clenched, a cold, hard knot of pure fury. I gently pulled Sophia's sleeve down, covering the mark, my hand lingering on her small arm. "Do you want to rest, sweet pea?" I asked, my voice carefully modulated, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. She nodded, her eyes heavy. I led her back to her room, tucking her into bed, promising to read to her once she'd rested. As I left her room, the image of that second bruise burned behind my eyes. I couldn't stay silent anymore. The veiled accusations, the subtle interventions, they weren't enough. Sophia was in escalating danger, and I, her only protector, needed to force Dante to see it. It was a terrifying thought. To confront him, to directly challenge the peace of his well-ordered, brutal world, felt like suicide. But the thought of that small, bruised arm solidified my resolve. I had to. I sought him out that evening, after Sophia had drifted to sleep, after the house had settled into its nighttime quiet. Lorenzo, sensing my determination, merely gave me a questioning look before silently following as I headed towards Dante's study. The heavy mahogany door was, as usual, slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. I pushed the door open the rest of the way and stepped inside. Dante sat behind his massive desk, bathed in the soft glow of a single lamp, a stack of ledgers open before him. The air in the room was thick with the scent of aged leather and something else. A faint, almost imperceptible trace of expensive tobacco. He looked up, his expression unreadable, those midnight dark eyes fixing on me. Lorenzo closed the door softly behind me, remaining on the other side, a silent, unwavering guard. "Elara," he said, his voice a low rumble. "To what do I owe this late-night visit?" There was no menace in his tone, only a quiet expectation. I walked closer, stopping several feet from his desk, my hands clasped tightly in front of me to hide their tremble. Signor Caruso, I began, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. I need to speak to you about Sophia. His gaze sharpened imperceptibly. He leaned back in his chair, his long fingers steepled under his chin. Is something wrong with my daughter? He asked, his voice now edged with a faint, dangerous stillness. Yes, I said, meeting his gaze directly. Something is very wrong. She is unwell. She has tummy aches frequently. She is withdrawn. And she is afraid. I chose my words carefully, dancing around the direct accusation, knowing I couldn't openly defy Ariana without risking everything. I believe it is due to the environment. She needs a change, Signor. She needs peace. She needs protection. He watched me, his expression like a carefully carved mask. Protection, he repeated, the word sounding both a question and a challenge. Are you implying she is not protected here? My resolve hardened. I am implying that a child, particularly one so sensitive, suffers greatly when those around her are unkind, when they do not treat her with the care and patience she deserves. I paused, taking a breath. She requires a sanctuary, Signor. A true sanctuary, and she does not have it here. Not fully. He held my gaze, his silence deafening. I braced myself for dismissal, for anger, for the cold assertion of his absolute control. But instead, a muscle in his jaw clenched, almost imperceptibly. He looked away, his eyes scanning the shadowed corners of his study, as if searching for an answer there. I understand, he finally said, his voice surprisingly soft, a stark contrast to his usual hardened tone. He looked back at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something in his depths, something raw and vulnerable, a shadow of regret. I failed to protect someone once. Someone innocent. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. The consequences, they were irreversible. I swore then that I would never allow that to happen again. Never. To anyone that needed my protection. My breath hitched. The words were a jagged wound, laid bare in the quiet of his study. This wasn't the monster. This was a man haunted by a past trauma, a man whose ruthlessness was perhaps born of a desperate need to control, to prevent another failure. My monster image of him, so carefully constructed, shattered in that moment, splintering into a million pieces. He wasn't just a force of nature. He was a human being, scarred and broken, hiding behind a fortress of power. My chest ached. A strange, unfamiliar ache. My fear was still present, but it was now laced with an undeniable, terrifying pull. A dangerous thread of empathy that coiled around my heart. He looked at me, his gaze searching, as if seeing me, truly seeing me, for the very first time. He stood then, slowly, coming around the desk, his presence filling the space between us. He was so close. The air between us thrummed with a new, dangerous energy. The unspoken secret, the shared burden of Sophia's suffering, and now his unexpected confession, had drawn us together, closer than I ever thought possible. You see it too, don't you? He murmured, his voice husky, almost raw. What she truly needs. He reached for me, his hand gentle as it cupped my cheek. His touch was warm, surprisingly tender, sending a jolt through me that wasn't entirely fear. My heart didn't just pound, it throbbed, a frantic, insistent beat against my ribs. I stared up at him, mesmerized, my body rigid, yet trembling under his touch. My mind screamed at me to pull away, to remember who he was, what he represented, but my body, betraying me, leaned infinitesimally into his warmth. His thumb stroked my skin, a soft feather-light movement that ignited a wildfire of sensation through my veins. The air was charged, thick with an unspoken desire that felt both terrifying and utterly inevitable. His head lowered, slowly, deliberately, his dark eyes fixed on mine, asking, silently, demanding. I should have turned away. I should have protested. But I couldn't. My every nerve ending hummed, vibrating with a desperate need for contact, for an answer to the terrifying question in his eyes. He paused, his lips just a breath away from mine, giving me one last chance to pull back. I didn't. I couldn't. And then his mouth was on mine. It wasn't gentle. It was a desperate, heated press. born of the fear of Sophia's escalating abuse, of the shared burden that now bound us, and of a raw, undeniable desire that had simmered beneath the surface for weeks. His lips were firm, demanding, yet there was an aching tenderness in the way he angled his head, coaxing a response. A whimper escaped me, lost in the kiss, and my hands, almost instinctively, found their way to his chest, clutching at the fabric of his shirt. I fought it, fought the shocking pleasure, the intoxicating warmth that spread through me. This was the monster, the man who owned me. This was wrong, but the hunger, the yearning, was a physical ache deep in my bones, and for a fleeting, dangerous moment, I surrendered. I kissed him back, a desperate, frantic press of my own lips against his, a silent plea for connection in a world that offered none. His arm tightened around my waist, pulling me flush against his hard, unyielding body. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the strong beat of his heart against my own. It was reckless, dangerous, exhilarating. The line between captor and protector, between hatred and something else, blurred, dissolved, leaving only this potent, terrifying moment. When he finally pulled back, a soft groan rumbling in his chest, our breaths came in ragged gasps. His eyes, still dark and intense, held a newfound vulnerability, a desire that mirrored my own. My lips tingled, swollen and sensitive. I stared up at him, utterly disoriented, my body thrumming with an electric aftermath. "Ilara," he murmured, his voice rough, his thumb stroking my lower lip. "You are more than you seem." He led me to the worn leather sofa, pulling me down beside him. We didn't kiss again, not then. Instead, he began to speak, his voice low and quiet, the words a stark contrast to the brutal kiss that had just passed between us. He spoke of the tensions within his family, the precarious alliances, the constant maneuvering for power. He spoke of his father, a man of iron will and unwavering ruthlessness, who had taught him that weakness was death. He spoke of the delicate balance of his world, the cost of every decision, every movement. It was a glimpse into the labyrinthine depths of his empire, a level of trust he had granted no one else. I listened, fascinated, horrified, and strangely, utterly captivated. His world was dark, yes, but he was revealing its contours to me, allowing me to see beyond the monster, into the complex, burdened man. The days that followed were a blur of heightened senses and terrifying intimacy. The kiss had changed everything, a silent, volatile agreement between us. Dante's vigilance over Sophia deepened. He subtly rearranged her schedule, ensuring her time with Ariana was minimal and always supervised by a nanny, or me, or even himself. Ariana's fury was a cold, palpable thing, but now she was forced to restrain it, knowing Dante was watching, knowing I was, in some twisted way, connected to him. Then Sophia fell ill. It started subtly, a persistent cough, a slight fever. Within a day, it worsened. Her small body was racked with a hacking cough, her skin clammy with sweat, her eyes dull and glassy. I spent hours by her bedside, sponging her forehead, coaxing sips of water, reading soft stories in a hushed voice. Maria, the kindly cook, brought up bowls of chicken broth, her eyes filled with concern. Late that night, as the rain pattered against Sophia's window, Dante entered the room. I was dozing in the armchair beside her bed, my hand still resting on Sophia's forehead, checking her temperature. I roused myself, instantly alert. He moved silently, a shadow in the dim light of the room, his eyes going straight to Sophia. He approached the bed, his gaze soft as it rested on her pale face. He reached out, his large hand gently brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. His touch was so tender, so devoid of his usual formidable presence that it startled me. "How is she?" he whispered, his voice rough with concern. "The fever is still high," I murmured, my voice tired. "But she's sleeping now." He sat on the edge of the bed, a solid, protective presence, his gaze never leaving his daughter. He was still the powerful, dangerous man. But here, in the quiet of his daughter's sick room, he was simply a father, vulnerable and afraid. He reached for my hand, gently taking it in his fingers warm and strong around mine. He squeezed it once, A silent acknowledgement, a shared moment of comfort over his sick child. Ariana, feeling cornered and threatened, makes a final dangerous move against Sophia, putting her in direct, life-threatening peril. Ilara discovers it, leading to a desperate race against time. Dante arrives, witnessing the direct aftermath, and in a terrifying display of his power, makes a ruthless decision about Ariana and her family, ensuring Sophia's and Ilara's safety, but at immense personal and professional cost, severing old ties forever. The echoes of Dante's ruthless decision against Ariana and her family reverberated through the estate like a shockwave. It had been swift, brutal, and absolute. I hadn't witnessed the full extent of it, but Lorenzo, ever the silent informant, had offered clipped details. The immediate severance of all business ties, the rapid dismantling of Ariana's family influence, their assets seized, their power crushed. Ariana herself had been escorted from the estate by two grim-faced men, her silence a chilling testament to her broken pride and shattered power. She'd gone, not with a whimper, but with a silent, furious snarl, her eyes promising vengeance that would never be delivered. Dante had seen to that. The air in the house, previously thick with unspoken tensions and simmering resentments, was now charged with a different kind of energy, relief, trepidation, and a new, uneasy reverence for Dante. He had shown the full, terrifying extent of his capabilities, not just as a leader, but as a protector. He had dismantled an entire empire, sacrificed long-standing alliances, all to protect his daughter. And, I realized with a jolt that went straight to my bones, to protect me. Sophia, still recovering from her illness, had been moved to a sunnier suite, far from her previous room, away from any lingering shadows. I stayed by her side, a constant comforting presence. She was still frail, but the terror was slowly receding from her eyes, replaced by a tentative, fragile peace. Her small hand, when it found mine, no longer trembled with fear, but clung with quiet trust. The fallout, however, wasn't just internal. Dante's decisive actions had ripple effects throughout his world. The days immediately following Ariana's expulsion were a maelstrom of hushed phone calls, urgent meetings, and the constant coming and going of grim-faced men. New alliances had to be forged, old loyalties tested. Lorenzo was still my shadow, but now his presence felt less like a guard and more like a shield. He protected me from the curious stares, the probing questions, and the veiled resentment from some of Dante's older associates who viewed me as the catalyst for the upheaval. Dante worked tirelessly, retreating to his study for hours, emerging only for urgent family matters or to check on Sophia. During one particularly fraught afternoon, he called me into his study. The room was heavy with the scent of old paper and the faintest trace of expensive tobacco. He sat behind his desk, looking weary, but his gaze was as sharp and unwavering as ever. "Ilara," he began, his voice low. "The Rossi family is making moves. They see opportunity in this transition." I nodded, recalling Salvatore's angry outburst about the Rossi family from a previous dinner. "They believe you are vulnerable." "Precisely," he said, a grim line to his mouth, "and I cannot allow that perception to take root. Not when Sophia's future is at stake." He leaned forward, his hands resting on the desk. "I need you to observe the interactions during the upcoming negotiations. Your insights into nonverbal cues, your ability to read the unspoken, it is a rare gift, one I need." My breath hitched. He was asking me to be more than a governess, more than a protected guest. He was asking me to be his eyes, his strategic partner. The idea was terrifying, exhilarating. This wasn't the life I'd chosen, but it was a path I was, with every passing day, choosing to walk. Not as a prisoner, but as an active participant. "I will do everything I can, Signor Caruso," I stated, my voice firm. "For Sophia." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, softening the hard lines of his face. "For Sophia," he agreed, his gaze lingering on me for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement of the new understanding between us. The negotiations were held in the Grand Salon, a vast room with soaring ceilings and ornate gold leaf. I sat in a discreet corner, ostensibly arranging flowers, my senses on high alert. The leaders of several allied families were present, their faces a mixture of calculation and forced deference. Dante dominated the room, his presence a gravitational pull, his words measured, his eyes missing nothing. I watched their hands, their subtle shifts in posture, the fleeting expressions that crossed their faces before they could be masked. I saw the fear beneath the bravado of one, the simmering ambition of another, the true loyalty of a third. Later, I relayed my observations to Dante, painting a picture of the unspoken truths hidden beneath the polite veneer of diplomacy. He listened intently, his gaze never leaving my face, absorbing every detail, every nuanced observation. "You have a remarkable talent, Alara," he murmured after I finished, his voice laced with genuine respect. "More valuable than you know." His trust, so carefully given, was a new anchor in my tumultuous world. I was no longer just the woman he protected. I was the woman he confided in, the woman whose judgment he valued. The most crucial step in securing Sophia's future was proving Ariana's abuse. It wasn't enough to simply remove her. Dante needed irrefutable proof within their complex, insular world to sever ties cleanly and legally, and to claim full custody of Sophia without challenge. I'd collected subtle observations over weeks, but Sophia's recent illness and the bruises had provided a catalyst. One morning, after Sophia was feeling much better, I gently sat her down in her new room, the sunlight streaming in. "Sophia," I began, my voice soft. "Do you remember when you had the boo-boo on your arm?" Her eyes widened and she nodded, her small hand instinctively going to her inner forearm. "Mommy did it," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "And do you remember how it happened?" I pressed, my heart aching but knowing this was vital. She hesitated, her lower lip trembling. Mommy was angry. I dropped the cup. Tears welled in her eyes. She pinched me. My chest tightened. It was enough. It was too much. Later that day, Dante summoned the family doctor, a stern, elderly woman who had served the Caruso family for decades. I was present, holding Sophia's hand, offering silent comfort. The doctor examined Sophia carefully, her expression grim as she noted the lingering faint discoloration on her arm, and other, older, almost faded marks that my own untrained eye had missed. But the conclusive proof came from a less obvious source. Maria, the cook, had also been called in. A woman of fierce loyalty to the Caruso family, she was equally devoted to Sophia. Maria, her face etched with sorrow, recounted how Ariana had often sent Sophia to bed hungry, how she'd heard sharp words and muffled cries from Sophia's room on multiple occasions. She even brought forth one of Sophia's tiny dresses, found hidden in the laundry, with a small, unexplainable tear near the armhole and faint, telltale discoloration. Her testimony, coupled with the doctor's medical assessment and Sophia's own quiet, heartbreaking statements, became irrefutable evidence. Dante stood silently through it all, his face a mask. But I saw the muscles in his jaw clenching, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hand. The truth, now laid bare, was agonizing. His family, his empire, was built on power and control, but it was also meant to protect its own. And he had failed to protect Sophia, at least in the past. His core wound, the memory of failing to protect someone innocent, must have flared with excruciating pain. Within days, the formal separation was complete. Ariana's family, facing overwhelming evidence and Dante's absolute resolve, offered no resistance. They understood the consequences of challenging him on this. Sophia was officially, legally under Dante's sole custody. The divorce proceedings, though swift and quiet in their world, were a stark declaration. Ariana was gone, exiled, her name erased from the Caruso lineage. A profound sense of peace settled over the estate, a fragile, hard-won calm. Sophia began to blossom. Her laughter, once a rare, hesitant sound, now echoed freely through the halls. She drew constantly, filling pages with vibrant, fantastical creatures, her fears replaced by a blossoming imagination. My place by Dante's side solidified, not out of duty, but out of choice. I saw the truth of his world now, its brutal necessities, its intricate dance of power and loyalty. But I also saw the unwavering core of the man, the fierce protectiveness that had driven him to dismantle his own carefully constructed life for the sake of his daughter. He hadn't changed his world into something soft or safe, But he had carved out a sanctuary within it, and I was part of that sanctuary. I chose to be. I chose the danger, the complexity for Sophia. And for him, he was a ruthless king, yes, but he was our king. And I was his queen not by title, but by shared purpose, by a dangerous, undeniable love. My romantic development with Dante deepened with every shared glance, every hushed conversation about Sophia, every moment of silent understanding. He had shed his emotional armor piece by piece, revealing the deeply lonely, intensely loyal man beneath. He talked to me about his fears for Sophia, his regrets about his past, about the relentless pressures of his world. And I listened, truly listened, offering him a space where he could be vulnerable, a space he had never known before. One evening, after Sophia had been tucked into bed, dreaming peacefully, Dante and I found ourselves in the conservatory. Moonlight filtered through the glass roof, casting the exotic plants in silver. The air was warm, humid, carrying the faint, sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine. Lorenzo, for the first time in weeks, was not present. Dante had dismissed him, a silent, profound gesture of trust. "She's truly happy now, Ilara," Dante said, his voice soft, almost a sigh, as he looked out at the moonlit garden. "Because of you." I walked towards him, my hand gently finding his, intertwining our fingers. His skin was warm, his grip strong. "Because of both of us, Dante. Because you chose to protect her, no matter the cost." He turned, his gaze meeting mine, and in his eyes, I saw it, not just the raw desire that had sparked between us, but something deeper, more profound. Love, unvarnished, fiercely protective, completely given. "I love you, Ilara," he said, the words a rough whisper, yet utterly sincere. "I love you and Sophia more than my life, more than my empire. You are my light in this darkness, my moral compass." My heart swelled, a joyful, painful ache in my chest. This formidable, dangerous man, who had once been my captor, was now my everything. He saw me, truly saw me, not just as Sophia's protector, but as his equal, his partner, his reason. He wasn't a monster to me anymore, not truly. He was a man, burdened by his world, but redeemed by his fierce love. "And I love you, Dante Caruso," I confessed, my voice thick with emotion, tears blurring my vision. "I love the man you are, the man you've become, the man who fights so fiercely for what he loves. You are not the monster I thought you were. You are my home." He pulled me closer, his arms wrapping around me, drawing me into the solid warmth of his body. His lips found mine, a tender, unhurried kiss that spoke of promise and forever. It was not the desperate, heated kiss of uncertainty, but a kiss of deep commitment, of shared future. His hand tangled in my hair, holding me close, as if he feared I might disappear. I pressed closer, needing to feel the undeniable reality of him, of us. The soft brush of his fingers on my skin sent a wave of comforting warmth through me. I let my own hands glide up his back, feeling the hard planes of muscle beneath his shirt, anchoring myself to him. This was our truth, forged in fire and fear, redeemed by love. "I want to protect you both, always," he murmured against my lips, his voice husky with emotion. "I want to give you a life free from the shadows, Ilara. A true life. A home." I pulled back just enough to look into his eyes. "We have a home, Dante. Wherever we are with Sophia, that's home." He smiled then, a genuine, unguarded smile that transformed his formidable features, making him achingly handsome. "Then let us build a new one," he said, his gaze unwavering. "One where Sophia can always laugh, and where you can pursue your art free from any debt. A home of our own." The idea was almost too beautiful to comprehend. A new home, a future, freedom, truly earned. The following weeks were a whirlwind of quiet, calculated changes. Dante meticulously detached us from the more dangerous, visible elements of his empire. He secured a new estate, not far from the city, but nestled in a secluded valley, surrounded by ancient forests. It was beautiful. A sprawling stone house with large, airy rooms and a vast, sunlit studio that he personally had renovated for me. A true sanctuary. We moved in early summer. The house was still sparse, waiting for our lives to fill its spaces, but it hummed with potential, with the promise of a new beginning. Sophia's new room was bright and cheerful, filled with books and art supplies, a plush carpet for her to play on. She explored every nook and cranny with joyous abandon, her small footsteps echoing through the quiet halls. One late afternoon, weeks after we had settled into our new home, I found myself in the living room, a vast space with soaring windows overlooking a verdant expanse of lawn and forest. The setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, casting long, peaceful shadows across the polished wooden floor. Sophia was there, sitting on a soft rug, building an elaborate castle out of wooden blocks. Her focus was absolute, her small brow furrowed in concentration, her tongue peeking out from the corner of her mouth. Her laughter, a sweet, uninhibited sound, drifted through the room as her castle inevitably, delightfully, toppled. It was a sound I had once thought I might never hear, a testament to the peace and security she now felt. Dante stood in the archway, leaning against the frame, watching us. He had changed out of his suit, now dressed in a dark, soft sweater and trousers, looking relaxed, at ease. He wasn't the formidable, ruthless man of the estate, not entirely. He was still powerful, yes, but now, here, he was simply our Dante. His gaze was fixed on me, a soft smile playing on his lips, his eyes full of adoration and a profound, quiet pride. There was a contentment in his posture, a deep satisfaction that spoke volumes of his happiness. I met his gaze, my heart swelling with a warmth that spread through every fiber of my being. I knew what he saw: Sophia, thriving, joyful, a vibrant child finally free to simply be, and me, no longer a prisoner, but a partner, a lover, an artist finding her voice again. My own smile was soft, a quiet promise of a future stretching before us, deeply romantic, unconventional, but fiercely protected by the dangerous, unbreakable love that bound us together. He walked over to me, his steps quiet, his presence a comforting weight in the room. He didn't say a word, just reached for my hand. His fingers intertwined with mine, warm and strong, a silent confirmation of our unbreakable bond. His thumb stroked my skin, a gentle, possessive gesture that sent a thrill through me. We stood there side by side, watching Sophia's innocent play, the low hum of her laughter filling the air. This was our happily ever after. Not a fairy tale, but a fiercely earned, dangerously protected, beautiful truth. This was our life. The echoes of Dante's ruthless decision against Ariana and her family reverberated through the estate like a shockwave. It had been swift, brutal, and absolute. I hadn't witnessed the full extent of it. But Lorenzo, ever the silent informant, had offered clipped details: the immediate severance of all business ties, the rapid dismantling of Ariana's family influence, their assets seized, their power crushed. Ariana herself had been escorted from the estate by two grim-faced men, her silence a chilling testament to her broken pride and shattered power. She'd gone, not with a whimper, but with a silent, furious snarl, her eyes promising vengeance that would never be delivered. Dante had seen to that. The air in the house, previously thick with unspoken tensions and simmering resentments, was now charged with a different kind of energy: relief, trepidation, and a new, uneasy reverence for Dante. He had shown the full, terrifying extent of his capabilities, not just as a leader but as a protector. He had dismantled an entire empire, sacrificed long-standing alliances, all to protect his daughter. And I realized with a jolt that went straight to my bones, to protect me. Sophia, still recovering from her illness, had been moved to a sunnier suite, far from her previous room, away from any lingering shadows. I stayed by her side, a constant, comforting presence. She was still frail, but the terror was slowly receding from her eyes, replaced by a tentative, fragile peace. Her small hand, when it found mine, no longer trembled with fear, but clung with quiet trust. The fallout, however, wasn't just internal. Dante's decisive actions had ripple effects throughout his world. The days immediately following Ariana's expulsion were a maelstrom of hushed phone calls, urgent meetings, and the constant coming and going of grim-faced men. New alliances had to be forged, old loyalties tested. Lorenzo was still my shadow, but now his presence felt less like a guard and more like a shield. He protected me from the curious stares, the probing questions, and the veiled resentment from some of Dante's older associates who viewed me as the catalyst for the upheaval. Dante worked tirelessly, retreating to his study for hours, emerging only for urgent family matters or to check on Sophia. During one particularly fraught afternoon, he called me into his study. The room was heavy with the scent of old paper and the faintest trace of expensive tobacco. He sat behind his desk, looking weary, but his gaze was as sharp and unwavering as ever. "Ilara," he began, his voice low. "The Rossi family is making moves. They see opportunity in this transition." I nodded, recalling Salvatore's angry outburst about the Rossi family from a previous dinner. "They believe you are vulnerable." "Precisely," he said, a grim line to his mouth. "And I cannot allow that perception to take root. Not when Sophia's future is at stake." He leaned forward, his hands resting on the desk. "I need you to observe the interactions during the upcoming negotiations. Your insights into nonverbal cues, your ability to read the unspoken. It is a rare gift, one I need." My breath hitched. He was asking me to be more than a governess, more than a protected guest. He was asking me to be his eyes, his strategic partner. The idea was terrifying, exhilarating. This wasn't the life I'd chosen, but it was a path I was, with every passing day, choosing to walk. Not as a prisoner, but as an active participant. "I will do everything I can, Signor Caruso," I stated, my voice firm. "For Sophia." A small, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips, softening the hard lines of his face. "For Sophia," he agreed, his gaze lingering on me for a long moment, a silent acknowledgement of the new understanding between us. The negotiations were held in the Grand Salon, a vast room with soaring ceilings and ornate gold leaf. I sat in a discreet corner, ostensibly arranging flowers, my senses on high alert. The leaders of several allied families were present, their faces a mixture of calculation and forced deference. Dante dominated the room, his presence a gravitational pull, his words measured, his eyes missing nothing. I watched their hands, their subtle shifts in posture, the fleeting expressions that crossed their faces before they could be masked. Ilara, Dante, and Sophia are shown in a quiet, domestic scene, perhaps in a new home, free from the immediate shadows of the past.